So let's start with, what are the parts or I guess let's get into the guts of creating a case study. Where do you start? Where does it go? What are the key pieces?
Yeah. So I think, just as we've just talked about, start by identifying, take a little while and think about the types of stories you want to tell, who you're trying to appeal to, because the details you include will differ. Like if you're selling into a CTO, probably want to have different kinds of details than selling into a CMO. They care about different things in their decision criteria. That will then inform not only who you go after, but the types of questions that you ask. The next component, the next critical part of this is running that interview. We'll talk later about some of the great questions you can ask, some of the ways to approach that. But at its core, one of the things that's simplest to think about is your job is not to be the world's greatest interviewer. Your job here is to transform the person you're talking to into a storyteller. That is your only job, is to get them to start opening up and share a story. So that means that it's not on you. This is the relief. This is that getting past that fear, the relief of you don't have to be this world-class editor. You know your product, you know your market, you know the pain that they dealt with. Your job is simply to help them articulate that in a way that is story-driven. When we get into the guts of the actual pieces themselves, I think some really critical things, if we bear this in mind, kind of a simple thing is if it's not relatable, it's not worth publishing. And so how do we make something relatable? Well, there's different components we can bring in. One is you do want to give some sense of, number one, the background of the company, but not only that, you want to have a hero in the story. And the person you're interviewing is that hero. Even in B2B sales, there are emotions involved, there are individual stakes, there are company stakes. Your story will be best told through the eyes of your customer. So you want to have that hero, that person, their quotes, their experience are really going to drive this for you. The sections of a story, I mean, just like any movie has a beginning, a middle, and an end, or a climax, and then a resolution. Your story, regardless of the type of story we're telling, any of the ones we just talked about, there is always going to be a challenge, a solution, and a result section. But when we talk about these sections, some very simple things that you can keep in mind. For that challenge section, it's not enough just to state what the challenge is. Set the stakes. Why was this important to solve for that customer? You never want to make your customer look like an idiot. The worst thing you can do is make them sound like a hapless fool who needed you to rescue them. Instead, fixate on why was this such an important decision to get right, and how were they wise for now gravitating to you as that solution? Very different, but a subtle change for you.
When we double click on that, because of course, a really important piece. I have seen people that are first-time case study writers write case studies that are exactly what you said. Oh, they were struggling with this, and the customer sent to me was like, "Hey, this makes us look like a bunch of bozos."
Yeah.
Is it the intent of the Is it the intent of the writer? Is it the questions asked? Because I've had this for case studies where I did the interview and somebody else wrote it up, and I've had it for case studies where somebody else wrote it up and did the interview. So I do feel this is a super critical piece, because the balance of trying to share what the objectives were and where the gaps were without being like, this also was an idiot, and then they found us. So help me understand, because I feel like it is a very delicate line to walk.
Yeah. I think where it comes from most often is that in trying to make the challenge seem as big or notable as possible, you try to make the situation as dire as possible. And in doing so, you make it seem like the hero was unaware of the situation, or they were just actively making mistakes that they weren't thinking through, or they haplessly kind of fell into the situation. I think when we, for example, are putting a challenge section together, we try to present it through the lens of how can we make this as charitable to the person as possible without making them look foolish. And so, for example, think about your own challenges in your own business, right? Sometimes, yes, it is, there's an issue I wasn't aware of, or human error, you've made a bad call. But are you a bad person for that? Are you a fool for that? No. You want to ascribe to the people in the story. They are heroes for being wise enough to choose you, for being smart enough to identify the problem, for recognizing the issue. Those are not character flaws. Those are character strengths. And so when you write a challenge section, instead of saying something like, they were really struggling to make this possible and they, weren't sure where to turn, you can rephrase it to say, the company was going through a difficult period. This person recognized that this needed to change, that this was a challenge for the company at the time, and recognized that the right solution for them would look like XYZ. One of the ways to get around this, bring in their decision criteria. They came to you for a reason. They had something in mind. They identified the type of solution. So in that challenge section, you can say they recognized this was an issue. They recognized that this was a challenge that the company was going through, and they were smart enough to, I mean, you might not use those exact words, but they sought out a solution that they knew would alleviate this pain. Now you are you're giving them agency. It's not happening to them. It's something they're experiencing and solving. It's not something inflicted upon them. It's something that they recognized was happening and decided to make a change. And that gives them agency, that gives them a voice, that gives them intelligence, and that makes them less of kind of a hapless victim.
Can I try reframing just in a way that kind of connected for me? Because there's this book that people might have heard me talk about, Good Strategy, Bad Strategy. And they offer a framework for like crafting strategy, which I thought was nonsense when I first like heard about it. And I was like, oh no, okay, it's not a framework, but they kind of give you a framework. Anyway, the whole idea is when you're crafting strategy, what you want to do is define the situation. And then based on the situation, it's like, this is the situation that we're in. The diagnosis is why we're in the situation. The guiding policy is what we're going to do about it. And then the coherent action is what specifically got done. And I think one way to, what connected to me was, in this case, our customer is defining the situation. They are coming up with the diagnosis. They've decided on the guiding policy, and they've hired us for the coherent action. So you don't have to be, even though you're the person that's doing this, it was their grand strategy that fits into this, and that. Is that a fair way to kind of?
Yeah, I think that's a good way of framing it, because again, it attributes to that person agency. It attributes to them proactiveness. It attributes to it's not, again, too often it's the company was really struggling. Worse still, these things were really inefficient. Worse still, it heaps on the issues. And in that dialogue framed that way, there is no recognition of the people here were not idiots. They knew this was happening. They diagnosed the issue. They identified the way forward, and then they came to you to implement. And I think the way you frame that is a tremendous way of thinking about it. And if we want to just distill it down even further to a sentence, give the hero agency. Give them, attribute to them the positive qualities of moving forward and figuring it out, as opposed to just, oh, well, we're experiencing all of this pain, and here comes in, your company on the white horse to save the day.
Totally. They're Luke Skywalker. They're the main character in this journey. We're just the little green dude.
Exactly. Yeah. I think beyond that, we want to add layers to these sections. So when you get into the solution section, which is a critical section, but what often gets overlooked is, and this can differ from story to story, but it's not just what was done. It's why those things and why they were valuable. In a services business, this is where your thinking is on display, or even in implementation. It's not just what was done, it's why those steps, why those things, why were those features valuable to them, how are they actually leveraged. Too often we distill this down to bullet points, like they used X solution, and that's the whole of it. That's not a story. Bullet points and great quotes are not a customer success story. What you want to capture in this is not only the what, but the why. Why those things, how are they deployed, or are they valuable? And then when it comes to the results section, we put a lot of pressure on ourselves. This is the other thing I think that kills a lot of case studies needlessly, is this big pressure we put on ourselves to have this huge, sexy metric, this well-defined, metrics-based outcome. And don't get me wrong, if that is there, absolutely capture it, tap into it. But the reality is, in the results section done well, yes, you're stating the metric if it's there, but you're going beyond the metric and into the impact. And what do I mean by that? Okay, if 90% increase in efficiency is the metric, the impact is, what did that mean for them? What did that make possible for them? What doors are now open that were previously closed? What can they do now or do better because of that 90% efficiency? The power is not just in the number. The number might earn the click. It might earn the initial attention. What earns the sale is appealing to that change of state, that transformative journey, that outcome that person really wants. And that's why you can have a fantastic story without any metrics, because as long as there is still a transformative journey, that is still an appealing narrative to someone who is on the other end of that transformation. It is still something they aspire to, even without the concreteness of, say, a metric to measure it. And not every story lends itself nicely to a metric either, so you don't have to force it.